I've been in the back just trying to process through, what I should talk to you guys about in the moments we are together tonight. And I know the theme is worth. And that's sort of a simple conversation that you've already had multiple people really talk to you about. If you're a follower of Christ, it's supposed to be really simple, right? Your worth is in Christ and not in all the things you do. And so I'm done. And the problem is it doesn't really work. I mean, that's the fundamental problem, because you already know that. You know everything we're supposed to say, and it doesn't really work very well. And then when you break down the human dilemma statistically, people who believe in God, people who believe in Jesus, people who follow him, people who are sincere in their devotion for him, they have the same kind of midlife crises as people who don't. And there's just as many of you here who are miserable in your marriage as people who don't believe in God. And just as many of you who struggle with alcoholism and depression as those people who don't believe in God. So part of the dilemma is that we have a really bad anthropology. And we hope that if we can keep just restating our theology, that it will change the way we understand what it means to be human. But it's a dilemma, because no matter what you believe in God, every day you have to deal with the fact that you're a human being. And it's really hard to know how to play this thing out. I know all the right things I'm supposed to believe, all the right things I'm supposed to feel. And about 18 months ago, I used to write books. 6 years ago, I stopped. And in fact, whoever it is that's giving books away, by the way, I just read a book, so I'd like to, just be in there for your consideration. And and by the way, it's called The Artisan Soul, and HarperCollins, so just in case, okay? And but I stopped writing books 6 years ago because I didn't come out of the Christian faith. I came into the Christian faith, and then I spent 10 years working with the urban poor and with drug cartels and in an edge culture. So I didn't really know anything about baby boomers. I didn't know anything about churches. I didn't even know churches existed. I'd never seen a Bible in my life until I was in college. And then by an accidental moment, it seemed, suddenly I was thrust into the world of Christianity, and I was not ready for it. I wasn't ready for the level of duplicity and vitriol that existed in this world. And it was more than my soul could bear. And I watched my kids grow up, and mostly my son, get damaged by the incredible meanness of people in the Christian faith. And so I had to make a decision. I decided my son only had one dad, and Christianity had lots of speakers, and so I thought I'd go ahead and choose my kid. And so I just dropped off the face of the earth as much as I could, and went into the fashion industry, into the film industry, and became a businessman again. And I always worked outside of the church because, you see, I didn't grow up in church, so I didn't know that people paid you to be a really, really bad speaker and a terrible leader over a small congregation. And I thought that's something you certainly had to do as a volunteer. And so for the first 10 or so years in my faith, my average income was around $6,000 to $8,000 a year. My maximum salary was $12,000 a year. My wife and I slept on the floor when we were married, and we had the best time in our life. It was a beautiful thing. And then sometimes by accident, if things come together, if talent and hard work and those God-orchestrated moments take place, your world sort of expands, and my world expanded. But I didn't like the world of Christian celebrity, and I started looking at TripAdvisor every day to imagine places I could disappear and never be found again. So I went to my wife and I said I wanted to just go create art for the next 20 years. And I kind of paid my dues in the Christian faith, and I like just to go do something else. And she said okay, but it's because she thought I would not be successful, she told me later. And then when we were in the business world and I was clearly going in a different direction, she said, what are you doing with your life? What's going on? Have you left the ministry? And I said, well, I'm not leaving the planet, so I'm clearly going to be involved in ministry since it's about caring for humans in the name of Jesus. And we had like a pretty huge crisis of faith. And I felt like I'd found the direction that I was going to keep going for the next 20 years of my life. And then about 18 months ago, I got an email from this kind of well-known evangelist whose daughter survived a plane crash. She was the only survivor, and she crawled over her boyfriend's burning body to survive. He sent me a text and said, "Can we talk?" And I was kind of surprised because I thought he would see me as a more like heretical voice in the world. And I said, "Sure." And I called him up and he said, "My daughter survived the plane crash. She's lost her faith. She's really broken. She's really hurting. The physical damage is not nearly as bad as the psychological and emotional damage. And you're the only person she listens to on the podcast. Would you be willing to talk to her for a few moments on the phone?" I said, "No, just tell me where you live. My daughter and I will get on the plane. We'll fly wherever you are in the world, and we'll sit down and talk to her. I mean, if anyone could help my daughter, I would give anything for that to happen." So me and Mariah got on a plane, flew across the country, drove a few hours. We spent the day with them. It was a really, really beautiful time. And you ever have those moments you feel like, I must be doing what God created me to do. God's got to be like really happy with me right now. I mean, I didn't have that thought, but I had that feeling. You know what I mean? Where you're like, I'm in the zone. This is what it means to be fully, truly human. No agenda except to do good in the world. And then while we're there throughout that day, I got a series of emails from lawyers letting me know that my business partner had executed a loophole in our company and I had lost everything. They took everything. I watched millions of dollars disappear in a blink of an eye, and all the money I'd put back in, everything was gone. And I had this massive knot in my stomach, and I did have the thought, God, why now? Like, why this timing? I'm here across the country on my own dime trying to care for someone, and you let this happen now? I can't really say that because I'm there, bringing healing and solace in the name of Jesus. And my daughter and I drove the couple of hours back to the airport because we were literally there for one day. And I couldn't eat. I mean, something happened inside of me. We got on the plane, in business class, and had to kind of pass on the meal, which is not really a problem. And then I landed, and I kept telling myself 1,000 times over, how are you going to tell your wife, Kim? You see, my wife, she's the most amazing human being. My wife was an orphan. She was an orphan from the age of 8 to 18. She was abandoned in government projects, left eating nothing but turnips and ketchup, lived in a foster home for the rest of her childhood, never heard I love you, never owned one thing that belonged to her. And there's just something that made me feel like I did something that mattered by providing a place for her and a life, And I had to fly across the country and sit down with my wife, and I remember saying to her, Kim, I lost everything. And I don't know what happened. I don't know who this woman is or anything, but without missing a beat, she looked at me and she said, I thought I was your everything. Like, who are you? And it's like, no one says that. Somebody writes that and puts it in a movie called The Notebook, or, and no one actually says that in real life. And you ever realize in a moment that what you said doesn't match what they said? Because theirs is really noble and yours is just human, and so I looked at her and I thought, how do you recover from that? So I said, well, I lost my other everything. And, I said, like the other everything, the everything that made me feel like a man, the everything that made me feel like there was proof that I had value, the everything that made me feel like God was like with me, the everything that was a part of my story of God, my story of us, and my story of me, it was all gone. And the next day I had to let my son know, not that we lost everything, but that we had just experienced the greatest sense of betrayal in our lives from our friends. And because of our own values, we had no recourse. And we just watched everything disappear. And then in the middle of that, everything got worse. It didn't just end. They decided not to pay any employees, not to pay off any projects, not to finish any projects. Everything was in my name. So I took a $500,000 loan on my house, line of credit, and I paid every employee and finished every project and followed them around, just fixing all the damage. And if it was not bad enough that day, that whole next year, I lost 20 pounds in 20 days. I went on what it was called, kind of like an unexpected fast. And because I couldn't hold food down, and then I decided to go ahead and make it an intentional fast, and just decided that this was a moment God was calling me to detach. And then I went before our leaders, and I'd really been disconnected from our church for so long, our church. And for 5 years, I'd really been vacant. I went to our leaders, and I said, my faith, it's like I'm just holding on by a thread. It's all I got. And so if you want me to leave, I understand. But I don't have anywhere to go. You're like the only community I have. And they said, no, your thread is like stronger than our rope, so we want you to stay. And they were really gracious to me during all those years. And so I went and shared with our leaders how I lost everything. And my life was nothing but ruin and rubble. And I said, I want to tell you this because I want you to watch God rebuild my life. I want to tell you this so that you can see through the brokenness and jagged edges of who I am, whether Jesus is real or not. And they asked me to speak the next day, so I chose the passage in Isaiah 43 where it says, put away the former things, do not dwell on the past. Behold, I'm doing a new thing, now it springs up, but will you even be aware of it? And my wife said to me afterwards, how in the world can you even talk on that passage? And I said, because if I wait, it won't be faith. But right now, if I speak from this place, all it is faith. That's all it is. And my little girl, my daughter, who's maybe 20 at the time, and my son both independently came to me and said, Dad, we think that God's doing something. Because you have such a high sense of responsibility that if God didn't take it all away, you would just be so responsible. You just keep doing that even if he wants you to do something new. And in the process of that, my son moved to New York and went to work for a fashion company. And we just sort of worked our way through that year. And it was just 18 months ago. Some of those brutal moments of my life. And maybe some of you can resonate with that space that I've been in for the last couple of years of my life. It's really fun to talk about things that no longer are relevant to you, that carry no real substance in your soul, things you can look back on, but I'm not looking back on this. I'm standing in the middle of it. And so I just began a series. It was a kind of a private series at Mosaic. I felt like I needed to reclaim and rediscover my faith. And we do a podcast that goes, to 500,000 people every week. Well, we shut the podcast down for that period. We just put old stuff on. And I said, for the next few months, what I want to do is I want to tell you every miracle I've ever experienced in my life. I'm going to tell you the story of me and God, and I'm going to take you into my life. And every Sunday I would just begin, and then I'd stop an hour later and go, okay, next week we'll pick up from here. And it was the most beautiful work of God that I think I've ever seen in my life. I couldn't even begin to understand what God was doing in the middle of this mix. And I felt as if God was showing me what he could do with rubble and what a great artist he is. How he's masterful with brokenness. And in the mix of that, and that's kind of what I want to maybe talk to you a little bit about tonight, is what we began to remember is the essence of being human. See, we humans have this great gift and this great curse that we don't really talk about. We don't know how to relate to it. I would call it the human imagination. I love the fact that in Hebrews 11 it tells us that the ancients were commended for this, and it doesn't really tell us what this was. It gives us a before and an after, and it says that they had confidence in things hoped for and assurance in things unseen. And then afterwards it says that they knew that everything that is visible came out of that which is not visible. And this is something the ancients had as a worldview, as a framework of reality. And as I have processed that over the last 18 months, I think I've understood myself, and I have understood what it means to be human at a deeper and deeper level. Because see, one of the things that makes us uniquely human is that we are materializers of the invisible. We don't really talk about that because we're not really comfortable with that. And I know when I became a follower of Christ, and I would talk about imagining, they go, no, you can't imagine, that's New Age. And I try really hard to not imagine because I wanted to be a really faithful follower of Christ, but I never was successful at it. And when I was a hurdler, I would always hit the fourth hurdle. And my coach said to me, look, I just want you to go home tonight I just want you to see yourself running all 10 hurdles perfectly. They were high hurdles. And I just went home. I just saw myself run those hurdles perfectly. And the next meet, it was the first time I ever finished all 10 hurdles. So I knew there was something about the human imagination that was really powerful and it translated into reality. And then when I became a person of faith in college, I led so many people to Christ in the shower. I mean, I know it's an awkward place to lead the world to Jesus, but I'm telling you, I had so many conversations with people in my imagination, and by the time I was washing the shampoo out of my head, they were all just kneeling, giving their lives to Jesus. And I realized that when I began then having these incredible debates across the country and dialogues and standing in corners and having all these philosophical discussions, that all those questions I'd already heard in my imagination. And I began having a sense that this imagination was a playground that God created so that he could meet us there. And it made sense to me because if God is all present and all knowing and all powerful, how in the world is he ever going to be able to share his smallest ideas in our puny little brains? And I love the fact that our imagination is this boundless space where God can give us a picture of what he sees. See, human beings are materializers of the invisible. We understand that all that is visible comes out of that which is invisible. And I'd love to have more time to break that down with you. But see, we don't really understand this about us. It is our curse. Because if you imagine a self that you're not, you will be filled with guilt and shame. If you imagine a life that you never lived, you will be filled with so much regret and even despair. If you look back and imagine a world that you never gave yourself to create, you will know that you've missed the part of your intention and purpose in life. See, there's no other species. I'm a part of this community called TED. It stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And I have to tell you, it was a difficult thing for me because the first time I went to TED, I wept after the 5th day. With these scientists and biologists and botanists and environmentalists and artists and actors and writers and probably 5 out of 2,000 people will have a belief in God or be followers of Christ. And I wept and I told my wife, I think I found where I belong in the world. I said, I've tried so hard to belong in the Christian world and I feel like I'm suffocating. I need to breathe deeply. But one of the things about TED was that everybody's an expert on something. I remember my first moment at TED, I was in Arusha, Tanzania, and I have this sort of like social anxiety thing where I don't do well in crowds. I'm extremely like socially introverted. So this is proof of God's sense of humor. And so my kids will always be on the phone with me and they'll talk me through. They go, Dad, make eye contact. Go talk to a person. People like you. You like people. You know, it's like you're having self-help children. And they kind of like help me through things. And so they, look for a person that looks more lonely than you. And so I saw this woman. She was older than me. And I thought, well, no one probably will talk to her. You know, she's kind of by herself. And she was getting food in line. So I went to the buffet line and said, hi, I'm Erwin. She told me her name. And I said, is this your first TED? And she told me. I said, this is my first TED. And then I said, do you have anybody to eat lunch with? She said, no. So we sat down at this table that seats like 10 people. And within minutes, 8 of the people sat down. And we just talked for like an hour and a half, nonstop. It was like this incredibly interesting conversation. While everyone else just listened in, they never even interrupted us. And I kept thinking, wow, I'm fascinating. And they're just listening and they're with me. And but you ever talk to someone and no matter what you talk about, they always go back to their subject? You know what I'm talking about? It's like a Raiders fan. Right? You want to talk about football, they want to talk about the Raiders. And or right, you'll get it later. And it's a person. They want to talk about politics, but you want to talk about art. And no matter what I talked about, she would talk about gorillas. And I would say, well, there are these political movements in China. And she goes, oh, yeah, well, gorillas have political organizations. And no matter what I talked about, well, one of the great issues, in society is that, the Chinese people don't have enough girls. And so eventually they're going to have to move into colonizing other nations just to find young women for their men to marry. And then she would go, yeah, but with gorillas. And I thought, wow, she's like really fixated on gorillas. And after about an hour, I looked at her and I said, Jane, could I ask you a question? And she said, sure. And I said, are you Jane Goodall? She goes, yes. And everybody seemed surprised I didn't know. And I said, that explains the whole gorilla thing. And every time I had lunch with someone, they were experts. They knew one flower. They spent their whole life studying the migration of one particular bee, or the march of the penguins, or the movement of killer whales. And I thought, man, I need a species, and I need to become an expert quickly. And in 3 months I turned 56, so it's kind of late to start developing an expertise. And so I thought I got to look backwards and find something I accidentally have studied. And I realized I have a species. It's humans. I've been a human most of my life. And I love observing humans from a distance. They're such a fascinating species, a little tricky up close. But they're really, really fundamentally interesting. And they're my favorite species. I live in LA, and people love cats more than they love children. They do. They treat their dogs like their family. And their families like dogs. And they do. And I know that's a joke for the East Coasters, but on the West Coast, that's not. And we value rare species of turtles more than the rarity and uniqueness of human beings. And I thought humans are going to be my species because they're my favorite species. They're my most valued species. What makes humans different than every other species? And you see, it's this unique space called the imagination. There are other things, but this is a principle. See, there are no giraffes out there going, I'm doing really, really well reaching leaves, but I really want to be a painter. I just feel like this, I don't know, but I have hooves. Damn those thumb creatures, and there's no buffalo. Going, I know I'm a water buffalo and this is what I'm supposed to do, but I want to dance, right? I want to dance, but it's like no one sees it in me, right? There are no lions out there going, I know I'm the king of the jungle, but I just feel like I'm underachieving. There are no lions out there having midlife crises. You're out here, you're having, Jim's like, there's all these midlife crises out here. Like, why? Do you think lions are going, I don't know. I can't hunt like I used to hunt. Right? It's like the young lions aren't interested in me, and the one I got, mangy. It's not happening. And like beavers. I think about beavers. I do, because I imagine, and my mind goes to beavers, and I thought, beavers, see, some of you, anybody here, last name is like Farmer? Carpenter? Smith? Okay. Well, blacksmith. See, carpenter, we get names because sons did what their fathers did, and those fathers did what their fathers did. You get names because that was your occupation. Farmer, carpenter, Smith. Anybody here named Escobar? It's Spanish for drug cartel. And everybody has a family business that passes on from generation to generation. And beavers, they just build dams. They just build dams. Wouldn't it be cool for like hiking? This is like a hiking room, but hiking, at Augusta, and then you saw a bunch of beavers building a dam, but there's like one beaver that's kind of over on his own building a bridge. It's so cool. He goes, I don't want to build dams. It's not bad enough I gotta mate with a beaver that looks like me, but now I don't want to build dams just because my father built dams and his father built dams, and I want to build bridges. I'm a uniter, not a divider. And you can just see it. It's like his mother's weeping. What did we do wrong? He was raised to build dams. He was going to build. His father's like, I told you, just catering that kid. And his grandfather's like, that's the worst dam I've ever seen. Doesn't really understand it's a bridge. And because you have to put church on it. And bridge, dam, and human. And you see, beavers don't wake up in the morning going, I'm going to build bridges, even if everyone else builds dams. But humans do. See, the human dilemma is that we can imagine a self that we're not, a life that we've never lived, in a world that we've never created. And the curse is that if you do not live up to the most noble ideals, you will live a life that's plagued with shame and guilt and self-doubt. But if you begin to listen to what is forming inside of your soul, there's this great possibility that God could create a future through your life that the world could not imagine. I know this is hard to imagine, but you're living inside of someone else's imagination right now. You see, when President Obama was elected, he was living inside of the imagination of at least one person who said, I have a dream that one day a man will be measured not by the color of his skin, but the content of his character. And there are many other people who sacrificed for that dream. And on that day where President Obama was inaugurated, we were living inside of the imagination of someone else who decided that reality could no longer be acceptable. See, Mandela was in prison, and what we discovered is what was in his imagination was more powerful than all the weapons and all the political systems of apartheid. Because the imagination of one human being can be so powerful that it changes the course of human history. It begins to create a different future. We're really uncomfortable with the future. That's why we say, well, God's the God of the future. And he is. But we act like we have no relationship to the future. But what I want you to think about is this possibility that like bees create hives and ants create colonies, humans create futures, because that's the way we're designed by God. And a part of your angst is that if you're taking the material of your soul and looking backwards with regret, you will actually begin to create a vortex in your soul that brings despair and destructiveness. Because you're designed by God to always lean forward into the future and allow him to infuse his dreams into your imagination and be his instruments for ushering that imagination into reality. I remember a few years ago, I was in New York. I was asked to speak at Columbia University, and I didn't know it was a debate. They had like their senior scientist and the head of the Department of Humanities, and then me. And by the way, that's the way you can make sure you win a debate. If you're the Christian side, you always get like a brilliant Christian and like a really unlikable atheist. And if you're the other side, you want to make sure you get really, really brilliant scientists and humanists, and then you go pick a Christian from LA. And you go, that way we're going to leverage things and make sure it works. And I didn't even know the subject. I looked over at me and he goes, oh wow, our theme is what can be known. And the scientist had a written, prepared speech. What can be known is what is empirically provable. I thought, man, that's good. I was like, yeah, and I'm with you. And he was Australian on top of that, so he had a great accent. And then the humanist, who was a Kantian philosopher, said what can be known as human ethics. Human action can be known. I thought, spot on, right? That's right. And then when it got to me, and she read her prepared speech, and when it got to my turn, I said, well, what can be known is I should have written out a speech. And he said, but I'm not really an expert on knowing. I'm like more really geared toward the field of ignorance. And I said, but what's strange is that science doesn't operate in the field of what can be known. Science operates in the field of mystery, of what isn't known. And philosophy really doesn't exist because of what can be known. Philosophy is an exploration of understanding what motivates us that is unseen and oftentimes unexplainable, it seems. And I said, my problem is that I kind of cheat. I know things I'm not supposed to know. And I quoted this conversation between Jesus and Peter, and there was like 500 people at Columbia, the faculty, and I knew it was not like in a friendly space. And I just said, look, Jesus said to Peter, who do you say that I am? And Peter said to Jesus, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, you cheated. You didn't know that on your own merit. Because what Jesus said is, flesh and blood have not revealed this to you, but my Father who's in heaven. He's saying, Peter, you always get it wrong. This time you got it right, so you cheated. That's what he's saying. And you know something you're not supposed to know. And I said, I know something I'm not supposed to know. You see, I know I'm not supposed to know that there's a God, but I know. But I don't know what to do with that, because I know there's a chair, but I also know I love my wife. How do you use know in the same way? Because I can touch that chair, but I can't touch the love I have for my wife. But if you had to ask me, what do I know more? I know more that I love my wife than I know there's a chair there. If I have to be uncertain about one thing, it's not going to be about whether I love Kim. It's going to be whether there's a chair there. And you're asking me, how can you know there's a God? Except I'm saying, how can you know that you're in love? There's something strange about humans. We have layers of knowing. When I come in town, when I've been traveling for a long time, and I come home and I say to my wife, because my friends call me up, hey, do you want to go play basketball? And I say to my beautiful wife, Kim, hey, honey, I know I've been gone for a week, but could I go play basketball with the guys? And Kim says to me, sure, go ahead. I know she doesn't mean that. See, I don't even know how I know that. See? Because humans are so layered in their capacity to know we can just, don't you know? I know that I'm losing you. I know so much that I don't even want to know. I want to pretend I'm awesome. And as we go through this, and you know what's strange? And there are things that we imagine that no one knows, that becomes reality that everyone later knows. And so then they had this Q&A, and they had like one card for the scientist, and one card for the humanist, and then a stack of cards for the Christian. And I'll never forget this question, because I love great questions publicly, so you can be humiliated. And this guy asked this question. He said, when you were a child, you had imaginary friends like Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and God. You gave up your other imaginary friends. Why did you keep God? What a great question. I love that question. Thank you. Thank you for that question publicly. And I said, first of all, you clearly don't know me if you think I've given up my imaginary friends. I mean, why would you do that? It's like, and I did have imaginary friends. You know, the Easter Bunny was not really in my top list, but the giant rabbit who lived in my closet was, and Santa Claus, and God was there. But you know, when my son was around 5 years old or 3 years old, I can't remember, he wouldn't eat his food, but we'd put him in the backyard and he would start eating dirt and rocks. We'd put him at the dinner table, he would not eat my wife's corn or broccoli, but he would eat the dirt and the rocks, which says something about Kim's cooking. And I remember one day, Kim was so frustrated with Erwin, and I said, honey, I have an idea. She goes, what? I said, let's just throw the food in the backyard and then let him go play. I think he'll play and eat at the same time. And she goes, you should not be a parent. And so, but what we didn't stop Erwin from eating because he couldn't distinguish between rocks and broccoli. He couldn't figure out which one was better for him and which one was not good for him. But eventually he figured it out. The rocks do not go down well. And when they have to come out, you pay the price for your choices. But the spinach makes you stronger. See, we didn't stop him from eating because he couldn't distinguish between what was right and what was real, and what was destructive and what was healthy. So why would I do the same with my imagination? Just because I had imaginary friends when I was a kid, why would I conclude that simply because you can create imaginary friends, that there isn't a friend who created the imagination? And if that imaginary friend causes you to die to yourself, and to your narcissism, and to your selfishness, and to if that imaginary friend refuses to leave you in a self-indulgent life, and if that imaginary friend calls you to live to your highest humanity, to live a life of nobility and honor and integrity and compassion, and I said, don't ever give up that imaginary friend because he's the most important friend you'll ever have. And here's the dilemma. You see, the reason I wrote this book, The Artisan's Soul, is that we have a bad anthropology about what it means to be human. See, every human being is intrinsically creative. Every human being is intrinsically an artisan. This is the image of God in you. And when that relationship with God is severed, you are not disconnected from your capacity to create. You're disconnected from the source that allows that creativity to be creative rather than destructive. As long as you breathe, you will create. But you can only create what comes out of your essence. The great fear for most of us is that our accomplishments and our achievements are the only proof of our essence. But if we can begin to understand that it's not a conflict between your accomplishments and your achievements, your success, and your essence, but that all those things are supposed to be an expression of your essence. And so wherever we are in our life, our focus needs to be the essence of our soul, because out of that, we will create. And so when I lost everything, I've reminded myself of the one thing I tell everyone who loses everything. What did you have before you had all that success? Like, what do you mean? No, what did you have before you had all that success? They say, nothing. I said, no. What you had is everything inside of you that God used as the material to create that something. So you know what you have now? Everything you need to create the future God wants for you. I think it's exciting. I love being 55. Man, in my 20s, they just thought I was like a rebellious follower of Christ. In my 30s, they thought I was a heretic. In my 40s, they just thought I was sort of eccentric. In my 50s, I think they think I'm a lunatic. Wait till I'm 90. Because really, what can they do to me when I'm 90? Kill me? You know, it's like, wow. I feel there's a madness that has stirred inside of my brain. In fact, about a month ago, my wife said, stop telling people you're mad. Stop telling people you're insane. But you know what? I'm just being honest with you. I was walking on the streets of Florida one day saying, God, why are you driving me mad? Why are you driving me insane? See, I see a picture of the future, and it has overtaken me. I am convinced before I die, the church will stop being the bastion of protection for the past and will become God's instrument for creating the future. I am convinced that in our lifetime, I'm convinced that in our lifetime, the church will stop being the manager of human sin and start becoming the epicenter of human creativity. I don't even think that I think that I know. See, I've lost my mind. I think this revolution has already begun, and that the Church of Jesus Christ is going to be once again the movement of dreamers and visionaries, where when people draw near to Jesus, their imaginations are going to go wild. Their souls are going to awaken to their creative essence. And we're going to run out of time for sin because we're just too busy